She was simply known as the janitor. They ridiculed her for reading while she worked. Then they were stunned when she delivered the valedictorian speech at graduation, revealing everything. At Larchmont Hills Academy, everyone recognized Olivia Cranston and Camille Strathmore. It was understood. They were the daughters of families who traveled by private plane and ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. Their presence in a room prompted people to either rise or avert their gaze, a reaction born of habit, fear, or envy. They weren't malicious, not precisely, but they understood early on that kindness wasn't essential. Politeness was a choice. Deference? It was reserved for individuals who could provide something in return. And for someone like Janice Albury, the reserved black woman with gentle eyes and rough hands, there was no advantage to be found. Janice had been employed at the school for nearly 2 years. Each weekday, she arrived before sunrise and departed well after the final SUV had exited the gated parking lot. She scrubbed the floors, shined the trophies in the main hall, and ensured the restrooms were fresh. She seldom spoke unless addressed, and her voice, when she did, was as tranquil as a still pond. But Camille observed something one day during lunch break. She had forgotten her phone in the chemistry lab, and hurrying back, she noticed Janice in an empty classroom, not tidying, but looking through a large biology textbook, her lips moving as if saying something softly. Camille rested against the door frame and smiled. "I didn't think you were interested in science," she said. Janice looked up. "I'm just reviewing some earlier learning." Camille angled her head. "Are you going to teach now, as well?" Janice smiled. "Not precisely." It began modestly. There were whispered comments and laughter when Janice walked by. Camille told Olivia, and the two created a playful game from it. "Oh, look," Olivia whispered one morning as Janice wheeled her cart past their lunch table. "Einstein with a mop," Camille chuckled. "Probably writing her thesis on floor wax." They laughed a little too loudly. Other students overheard. Some laughed with them. Others avoided eye contact. No one intervened. Janice kept her head down. It was her usual practice. The students overlooked the way her eyes paused on the school crest etched into the wall, her gaze thoughtful rather than resentful. They failed to observe her tendency to listen more than to speak, or her habit of keeping a notebook in the side pocket of her cart, partially filled with notes. One person showed her kindness. Mr. Del Toro, a literature teacher from Fresno who had a fondness for those often overlooked. On one occasion, he observed Janice carefully aligning the copies of To Kill a Mockingbird on a cart just outside his classroom. "You know," he remarked, "most people simply stack them and proceed." Janice offered a slight shrug. "That book warrants more than crooked edges," she said. He chuckled. "I often say that," he stated, then paused. "Have you read it?" Janice responded to his question. "Twice. Initially in high school, and subsequently when I was mature enough to grasp its true significance." He never requested anything further, but from that point forward he would leave a book for her on the bench outside the staff room every other Friday. No message, no inquiries. Nevertheless, the girls persisted. One afternoon, Olivia waited until Janice passed by, then whispered, "I bet she sleeps in the janitor's closet. Probably dreams in Clorox." It wasn't simply impolite, it was unkind. But Janice continued walking, and that disturbed Olivia more than anything. She anticipated embarrassment or anger, or at the very least a reaction. Janice's silence, however, felt inescapable. This made her a figure to be reckoned with. The lights at Northwood High typically dimmed around 8 p.m. Most evenings, though a few always remained lit, sufficient to create long shadows across the marble corridors. It was during these hours that Janice seemed to transform. As the classrooms fell silent and the usual teenage bustle subsided, she would move her cart into the supply closet, change into a clean shirt, and bring her notebook to room 114. Room 114 was no longer designated for a specific class. It had a flickering light and one desk leg shorter than the others. Most teachers steered clear of it. However, Janice had adopted it. The door did not lock, and that was acceptable. She didn't require privacy. She simply needed space. She would retrieve her laptop, a 6-year-old Dell lacking the N key, and sign into her coursework. She was 6 credits shy of finishing a degree in educational leadership through an accelerated adult program offered by the same university that operated Larchmont Hills Academy. A small, understated provision located within the staff handbook provided full scholarships to employees who worked a minimum of 30 hours a week. Most staff members overlooked it. Janice had not. It wasn't about ambition at this point. The focus was on completing a project that had been halted years prior. This was a time when she possessed a child, a husband, and a secure job in Maryland, only to lose all three within 18 months. Life has a way of deflating you before you're aware you've been holding your breath. She never expressed her struggles to anyone. It wasn't a behavior she'd been taught. Occasionally, late at night, she would receive a message from her sister in Detroit. You sleeping or still playing superhero? Janice would respond with a photo of her textbook and a brief message. Chapter 6 is proving difficult. Her sister would then send a laughing emoji, followed by, "You're still the smartest person I know. Don't let those stuck-up girls get to you." She never shared with her sister the full extent of the difficulties. She omitted the incident where Camille accidentally knocked over the bucket of dirty water and seemed to find amusement as Janice knelt to clean it. There was also the incident when Olivia confided in a group of parents during a school tour, suggesting the institution favored hiring individuals with charitable backgrounds. Yet, Janice persisted. She consistently arrived 5 minutes early. Her cart was always spotless, her uniform immaculate. She possessed patience but lacked innocence. Her understanding of the school's customs surpassed that of the students. Beneath the refined wooden interiors and carefully selected diversity pamphlets, there existed a decay. Not everyone, naturally, but sufficiently pervasive to permeate the atmosphere. Janice had no intention of rectifying it. Her task was simple: observe, listen, and document. Unbeknownst to the students, and even the staff, Janice had been selected for a role extending beyond cleaning floors. 2 years prior, following an internal report alleging the Academy's neglect of racial and economic discrimination, the Board of Trustees approved a discreet strategy. They decided to place someone within the school, silently. Someone who wouldn't attract attention. Someone who could witness everything. While working part-time at a community college in Oakland, Janice received a job offer. The position came with no title or special privileges, simply an ID badge, a mop, and a defined purpose. That purpose was to observe, to take notes, and to document the patterns of behavior that were not able to be captured in policy memos or camera footage. The work was not glamorous. However, it was significant. And late at night, with her coursework open in one window and her field notes in another, Janice recorded everything. It wasn't only the cruelty, but the indifference, the smiles that vanished the moment someone turned away. She also wrote about the good teachers, the limited number of students who met her gaze. She recalled how Mr. Del Toro left that copy of Beloved with a sticky note that said, "For someone who understands silence." Still, each shift drained her, not from the labor itself, but from a necessity of feigning. She bore their ignorance as a second uniform, and with each passing day, it became increasingly burdensome. A change was on the horizon, though not as they anticipated. By early spring, the students at Larchmont Hills Academy were already largely disengaged. Señoritas had arrived gradually, like a dense fog, subtle, pervasive, and self-satisfied. Olivia and Camille frequently spent their days in the senior lounge, examining college acceptance emails and making critical remarks about those they perceived as inferior. However, subtle comments were no longer sufficient. The initial excitement had faded. They desired a significant reaction. On a Monday morning, Camille entered the admin office and pretended to be worried. "I think the janitor's been stealing test copies," she whispered to the front desk clerk, making her voice sound very low. "I saw her in a classroom late at night, alone." Ms. Robbins looked surprised. "Janice, are you certain?" Camille adopted her most innocent expression. "I don't want to cause problems for anyone, but this school is supposed to be secure, isn't it?" It was a carefully planned action. If anything resulted from it, so much the better. A sense of unease lingered. That afternoon, Janice was summoned to the operations office. The interaction was presented as a standard procedure with no direct accusations. She remained composed as the facility's manager reviewed his notes, visibly ill at ease. "We simply wanted to inquire if you've been present in unoccupied classrooms during your shift," he stated. "I clean all classrooms assigned to me." Janice responded directly. "Yes, but do you remain longer? For any purpose?" He maintained eye contact. "I complete my assigned tasks. Occasionally, I require a brief respite, as do most people." He acknowledged this with a nod and made a note. "Very well, that concludes the discussion." Janice rose. "Should any questions arise regarding my work, I would welcome a straightforward discussion." The gentleman's cheeks flushed slightly. "There are no concerns. Simply, you understand procedure." It was a flimsy fabrication, and both were aware of it. Outside the office, Janice located Camille resting against the wall, feigning interest in her phone. The smile offered was not amicable. "Everything satisfactory, Miss Albury?" Her tone was saccharine. Janice remained unmoved. It was more effective than one might expect. Camille's face faltered briefly, then quickly returned to its characteristic sneer. However, this was no longer a trivial matter. Camille and Olivia had matured observing individuals evade consequences. This fostered their confidence and impulsiveness. 2 days elapsed before Olivia planned a further incident. She let a silver necklace fall near the janitor's closet and then dramatically announced its disappearance from her locker during lunch. A small crowd assembled. She raised her wrist in a theatrical gesture. "I'm certain I had it in there earlier today," she declared. "I suppose it could be lost permanently," Camille observed. Their friends chuckled, some visibly anxious. "Perhaps check the mop bucket," they joked. However, when one of the admin staff overheard the remark and volunteered to investigate, Olivia quickly recanted. "No, I'm sure I simply misplaced it. It's nothing significant," she said. The immediate concern subsided, but the awkwardness remained. That evening, Mr. Del Toro walked past Janice in the hallway. He stopped. "You're doing okay," he said. Janice looked up from her card. "You've been here long enough to know the games these kids play," he sighed. "Too long sometimes." There was a pause. "Is there anything I can do?" She thought for a moment. "Keep doing what you're doing. That's rare enough." What neither of them knew, what no one knew, was that Janice had already sent her first internal report to the board. Documented dates, quotes, and behavior patterns were observed. Names redacted for now, but she wasn't the only one being monitored anymore. An independent firm had initiated discrete audits. These audits included interviews and surveys presented as student engagement questionnaires. Camille and Olivia believed they had complete control over the school, but attention was shifting. Rumors began to change their focus. Despite this, the girls continued their actions. Cruelty had developed into a pattern, and patterns are difficult to change when they have never faced repercussions. Then, one Friday, Janice heard something that stopped her. In the lounge, behind a cracked door, Camille was speaking to a boy from the tennis team. "You know that janitor, Janice?" she said. "My mom says people like her are just here to make the place look diverse." She referred to it as optics. The boy laughed. Olivia added, "My dad said the school's bleeding money giving those scholarship perks to staff. It's basically charity," Camille scoffed. Unable to repair the situation with books, Janice stood quietly, 1 foot still in the hallway, one hand gripping the edge of her cart. She said nothing, but something within her shifted. She had been patient long enough, but now she had everything she needed, and it was almost time to show them. Before she was sweeping floors under fluorescent lights, Janice Albury had been someone else entirely. 12 years prior, she held the position of Director of Curriculum Development for a public school district in Maryland, known then as Janice Simmons. Her responsibilities included managing a corner office, overseeing 3 staff members, and proudly displaying a plaque from the state superintendent. She was married and a mother. Life at that time possessed a sense of order and comfort. However, that changed with a tragic event. Her husband's car was struck by a delivery truck on I-83 during a snowstorm. He perished in the accident. Her daughter, Kira, who was 6 years old at the time, survived, though with significant injuries. After 2 months spent in a hospital bed, Janice faced a year of surgeries and rehabilitation. While insurance covered a significant portion of the expenses, some costs remained. Janice drew upon her savings, her retirement funds, and ultimately sold their home. Following this, Kira developed pneumonia, which tragically led to her passing. Janice resigned from her job 2 weeks following the funeral. The sight of a school brought back the image of Kira's empty chair, and the sound of children's laughter in the hallways served as a painful reminder of her loss. She moved around, taking temporary work, staying with friends, then in rented rooms, ultimately settling into a small studio apartment in Antioch, California. Despite these changes, she consistently read and continued learning. This pursuit led her to discover a program, a little-known educational equity initiative offered through a university partnership, representing a fresh opportunity. When asked if she would agree to work undercover to examine behavioral differences between students from privileged backgrounds and faculty perspectives, she readily accepted. She acted not out of financial need, but because the system had let down too many individuals resembling her. She refused to accept this inaction. Applying for the janitorial position using her maiden name, she successfully completed the background checks, keeping her degree and credentials secured in a folder at home. Initially, her goal was simply to observe and listen, to remain unnoticed. She had no plan to participate. The incidents she witnessed were disheartening. A senior teacher deriding a student with a speech impediment under the assumption of privacy. Discussions about a girl's financial aid occurred at a staff meeting, presented as a personal failing. Then there were Camille and Olivia, whose parents' substantial donations had secured the gymnasium's naming rights in honor of a hedge fund. Their self-assurance stemmed not from conceit, but from a sense of privilege. Janice felt disheartened by what she observed. Eleanor Larchmont, the school's founder, had originally conceived of the academy as a place for future leaders from all backgrounds. However, that original vision had diminished over time, obscured by financial influence, promotional efforts, and preferential admissions practices. Consequently, Janice began her work. Her notebook rapidly filled with detailed observations, specific dates, recurring linguistic patterns, staff reactions. She consistently attended faculty meetings when possible, choosing to sit in the rear of the room. She posed inquiries that prompted discomfort among those present. She took on committee assignments that others avoided. Steadily and carefully, she became the source of information the board required. And during evenings, as the halls became vacant, she studied. She wasn't simply observing, she was revitalizing herself. Each finished module advanced her progress toward that second degree. Each submitted essay felt like rediscovering a part of the woman she once was. During one evening spent reviewing a case study about institutional gatekeeping, a particular sentence caught her attention. It stated that genuine authority doesn't proclaim itself, it waits to be recognized. She emphasized this line with underlines. Graduation was approaching rapidly, just 3 weeks away. She had finished the program without drawing much attention. Her grade point average ranked her among the highest in her group. The board had previously approved her to address the audience. Camille and Olivia continued to walk through the halls with an air of confidence, unaware of what was about to unfold. The faculty, too, were on the verge of a realization that learning extends beyond the classroom. Janice had observed them for 2 years. Now, she was poised to step forward, taking the central position, and they would be completely surprised. That morning, the sky above Antioch was clear, excessively bright considering the anxiety some individuals brought into the Larchmont Hills Academy Auditorium. Families occupied the seats, proud parents filled with anticipation and clutching phones, surrounded by flowers, ties, and costly perfume. The scene appeared flawless. Camille Strathmore wore a champagne-colored stole that her mother had flown in from France. Olivia Cranston had her hair professionally styled before dawn, her makeup applied to endure the entire day. They smiled for photographs, laughed with joy, and stood with the grace of young women who'd been raised to believe the world was within their reach. Behind the scenes, Janice remained still in her black robe. There were no embellishments, no unnecessary details. She declined the academic award the committee presented, stating she had no need for it. What she desired was a single moment, just one, and that moment had arrived. The dean, Dr. Leonard, approached her, holding a program. "Ready, Ms. Albury?" She met his gaze. She had been prepared. He offered a restrained smile and returned toward the podium. Camille and Olivia did not even look at her as they passed by in their elegant gowns. It was understandable. She was unnoticed once more, simply an element of the surroundings. The ceremony commenced as it always did. Names were announced, families applauded, and speeches were delivered. The school's jazz trio performed something gentle and unremarkable. Subsequently, Dr. Leonard approached the microphone. As we approach the end of this year's commencement, we have a particularly noteworthy announcement, one that, intentionally, has remained private until this moment. Students adjusted in their seats. Parents moved closer. Even faculty appeared puzzled. This year, the Board of Trustees authorized a confidential academic pilot program meant to enable working staff at our institution to pursue higher education with complete anonymity. The program demands both academic excellence and professional integrity of the highest order. Camille glanced at Olivia. Olivia showed a frown. Murmurs began behind them. Dr. Leonard proceeded. "We are pleased to announce that the highest academic honor this year goes not to a student you might have learned alongside, but to someone many of you overlooked." He paused, then stated distinctly, "Please welcome Janice Albury, this year's valedictorian." A stillness hung in the air. Then, with a suddenness like a glass shattering in a quiet room, the news arrived. People turned their heads, their mouths agape. Camille remained motionless, her expression rigid. Olivia blinked, then attempted a laugh, only to find herself laughing alone. Janice proceeded deliberately to the stage. Her movements were controlled, her posture upright. She avoided looking at the assembled group until she reached the podium. Then, she surveyed the audience slowly, her gaze finally fixing on Camille and Olivia. Following this, she began to speak. I arrived at this school with a mop in one hand and a question lingering in my thoughts. Her voice resonated, strong and clear, without any doubt. I found myself questioning the true nature of this institution. Beyond the official statistics, the promotional materials, and the presentations, I wanted to determine if respect was readily available here, or if it was something that needed to be gained only by those who possessed the appropriate attire, footwear, and family names. The auditorium was completely silent. I dedicated countless evenings tidying up after those who spoke negatively about me. And when they observed me reading a book or attending a classroom session after hours, they mocked. She paused. However, my focus extended beyond mere reading. I was observing, studying, not solely to earn a degree, but to uncover solutions. She turned slightly toward the faculty, and now I possessed them. Students surveyed the room, adjusting in their places. Olivia's expression remained inscrutable. Camille clutched her program firmly, her knuckles white. Janice lifted her chin. I stand here today, not just as your valedictorian, but as a reflection of the very things that Elmwood High claims to stand for: growth, opportunity, and truth. But she hadn't revealed everything yet, and what she said next would change the room forever. You could hear a cough from 3 rows back. A chair creaked. A phone buzzed quietly against someone's hip, but no one moved to check it. A hush fell over the room as people leaned in, anticipating Janice's next words. She proceeded deliberately, taking a drink of water, briefly reviewing her notes, and neatly folding them. Then, she raised her gaze. "I'm sure some of you are wondering how I came to be here," she began, gesturing to her robe and the podium. A few members of the front row, largely faculty, nodded in agreement, seemingly unaware they had done so. "My presence here wasn't solely for the purpose of earning a degree," she added. 2 years ago, the university board contacted me following concerns raised, discreetly, privately, regarding the increasing atmosphere of class division and privilege within Ashworth Academy. They requested I consider a position, but not as a faculty member, not as a consultant, as a janitor. At this, the room shifted. Janice allowed the silence to linger. My purpose was to observe. Away from executive suites and scheduled gatherings, I observed. In the corridors, the athletic facilities, the classrooms buzzing with after-hours conversations where students felt safe to speak openly, believing they were unobserved. I was attentive. A woman among the parents visibly expressed discomfort. Over a period, I noted seemingly minor incidents. Yet, these minor incidents accumulated. I saw how some students treated those they perceived as outsiders. I noticed how the lack of intervention from adults permitted that behavior to escalate, and how some of you, who should have been more informed, chose to ignore it. She looked toward the staff. Some of you were aware, and you remained silent. The words struck with force. Camille's mouth felt parched. Olivia had ceased breathing through her nose. She remained motionless, as if blinking would make her vanish. The most troubling aspect, Janice continued, is that the behavior was not concealed. It was open, commonplace, accepted, and frequently it was encouraged, amid smiles, with focus, and with widespread recognition. She paused, taking a moment. I'm not here to criticize you. I'm here to offer a reminder. Her tone became gentler. You cannot determine someone's worth based on their clothing or their profession. You cannot assess dignity through financial status or lineage. She lowered her gaze briefly, then raised her head with renewed focus. I once had a daughter. Her name was Kira. She would have been your age now. A stillness fell over the audience, similar to a chilling breeze. She passed away before she had the opportunity to wear a cap and gown. I'm not sharing this to elicit sympathy. I am sharing it because I see her in all of you. I see who she could have become. And I wonder, if she had been here, would she have been ridiculed as well? No one dared respond. Perhaps not. However, what I know for certain is that if you depart here today believing the world will defer to your name, you have already failed. She paused again. Education is not merely about books and tests. Remember how you handle the individual you believe you'll never require assistance from, because life possesses a peculiar tendency to shift unexpectedly. Subsequently, the final setback occurred. I have delivered my conclusive report to the board. My assessment has led to a restructuring of the scholarship program, emphasizing integrity and contribution rather than legacy. A comprehensive audit of disciplinary cases spanning the last 5 years will be conducted, and students involved in harassment, encompassing verbal and social forms, will be subject to formal reviews. A subtle vibration resonated from the rear. Several parents murmured amongst themselves, their voices becoming more audible. Janice moved back a little. This isn't retribution, it's accountability. She fixed her attention on Camille, then Olivia, who had lowered her gaze to the floor. And accountability is not swayed by the wealth of your father. However, that wasn't the finality of the matter, as repercussions would follow even after the applause subsided. The ceremony concluded with noticeably diminished enthusiasm compared to its start. Some students applauded, while others seemed unsure how to react. A small number of families, appearing uneasy, left the room before the conclusion. However, Janice maintained her composure, smiling as she returned to her place. It wasn't the back row where she previously observed, but rather near the front, alongside board members and professors who now regarded her with a noticeable change, respect. Camille did not speak as she departed the auditorium. Her father was already waiting close to the car, his expression stern, avoiding her gaze. Olivia's mother, arms crossed, stood by the valley in stunned silence. There were no congratulations, no flowers, just silence. Inside, a small crowd had gathered around Janice. Teachers who had previously offered only a polite greeting were now shaking her hand. Mr. Del Toro remained at a respectful distance, waiting for an opportune moment. You didn't simply speak, he stated when they eventually talked. You transformed the entire atmosphere. Janice looked at him and smiled softly. The air had needed changing. Upon the lawn, several of the younger students expressed their awe. A girl wearing a red dress confided to her friend, "I wasn't aware she attended school," to which her friend responded, I didn't know she could articulate herself so eloquently. A sense of belated recognition began to spread, an acknowledgement of what had been missed, what had been consciously disregarded. That evening, Janice was in her apartment, with a plastic container of leftover chicken salad and the commencement program placed on the table next to her. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the board's director. The subject line read, "Thank you." The message stated, "Your final report is being reviewed. Policy meetings begin next week. Your courage will shape the future of this school." She set the phone down and exhaled. It wasn't relief, it wasn't pride, but a quiet, grounded sense of purpose. The kind that didn't require applause or accolades. Meanwhile, news about the graduation speech spread quickly. A video shared online by a teacher's assistant was already spreading among parents and alumni. The title was straightforward: Janitor or Genius, Larchmont's Graduation Shocker. Regarding Camille and Olivia, Camille was required to attend a disciplinary review. Her parents were obligated to participate. A scheduled summer internship at her father's firm was discreetly canceled. It was rumored that she would be asked to fulfill community service hours before receiving her diploma. Olivia's parents initially resisted, indicating they would pursue legal action and requesting apologies. However, upon the school sharing portions of Janice's records, containing witness statements and documented incidents, they ceased their objections. Olivia was permitted to graduate, although her honors were removed. Both girls remained silent regarding the matter, but those familiar with them observed a change. The teasing ended, and the hushed conversations also stopped. The following fall, Janice received a new opportunity, the role of Director of Equity and Inclusion Initiatives for the school district. She agreed to take the position. On her final day, as she walked the halls with her cart, she placed a sticky note on the supply closet door. It read, "Respect isn't owed, it's revealed." With clean floors, clear eyes, J.A., and a final goodbye, she left the mop behind. Leaving Larchmont Hills, she wore a navy blazer and carried a satchel, not to demonstrate professional advancement, but because she felt no further need for discretion. 1 week later, she returned, not in a work uniform, but as a guest speaker for the new staff orientation. Standing at the podium again, she addressed the teachers, new hires, and assistants. "Your job title doesn't determine your influence," she stated. "How you treat people when no one's looking does." Her voice resonated to the back of the room, and this time, everyone was attentive because they finally grasped the meaning. Respect isn't about volume, it's about the impact you make. If this story resonated with you, if it prompted you to reconsider how we treat people, we believe it's sufficient. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, and discuss it. The world would benefit from more individuals with qualities similar to Janice's, and it's valuable to remember that the most reserved person present could impart the most significant lessons. Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham Public Schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet, always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, "I'm still here. I'm present." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent, a smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. "Miss Daniels." It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. "Not yet." Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now." Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. "Right this way, sir." But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. "This is two-way, right?" he asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now." Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. "How is this addressed?" The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. "We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption." "Disruption?" Marlene lifted her eyebrows. "Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I had already been seated? That is not a small matter." The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. Ma'am, the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. Please. Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. Thank you, she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated near the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. Excuse me? The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. Hello, she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. What transpired here doesn't feel right. Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that? A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving, she said. No, the woman responded, her voice rising. You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will, and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. I'm sorry, the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards 2, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager 2 rows back, had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. "We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne," he stated. The woman in denim remained still. "No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black." That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. "That's unfair," a younger man murmured. "There's no way that should have occurred." Another person then spoke, their voice raised. "Return her seat." The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. "Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance," he stated. "I simply took the one they assigned to me." The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. "You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once." He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "It's not my responsibility." The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. "We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time." However, the man wearing the Tiger's cap interrupted. "Not until she receives her seat back." He turned and addressed Marlene. "Ma'am," he said, "would you like your seat back?" She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. "I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed," she stated quietly. "You are not," the woman from row 2 responded. "You are the reason it might finally be rectified." That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. "If she doesn't receive her seat," someone declared, "we are not sitting either." Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. "We need to halt boarding," a fellow passenger interjected. "It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately." Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. "I didn't request this situation," she stated. "However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline." Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. "Good for you. You didn't deserve that." We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. "That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them." By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "Your class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the fourth ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Louis. "Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming." She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. "Marlene Daniels?" The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. You made it, she murmured. Naturally I did. Marlene responded. Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me? They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations. I didn't attempt to, Marlene stated. I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore. Alia concurred. Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention. Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call, said a representative. We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands. I'm flattered, Marlene said plainly, but I won't be attending. The woman on the other end paused. May I ask why? Marlene responded, I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to. Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plane aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, I am aware of my identity. As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present. A judge publicly fined her concerning a small cross necklace, believing she was simply another person present. However, when she rose and spoke, the entire courtroom became quiet, and the subsequent events left even the bailiff astonished. Alana Merriweather did not go to the Rutherford County Courthouse, anticipating conflict. She went to support her younger cousin, Deshawn, who'd been arrested following a routine traffic stop that had escalated into a considerably larger matter. She requested a day of leave from work, chose a navy blue blouse, slacks, and flats. The outfit was simple and understated, yet respectful. A delicate gold chain with a small cross hung around her neck. It was not ostentatious, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Someone did notice. The courtroom was full. It contained people awaiting their turns, lawyers reviewing documents, and deputies positioned along the walls. Alana settled into the second row, remaining quiet and composed. Her purse rested in her lap. She nodded softly to her cousin, who appeared exhausted from stress, his eyes weighed down by fatigue. He remained silent, offering her a look of thanks. That was sufficient. Judge Raymond Keller entered with his characteristic formal walk. The judge was known for a particular demeanor. Across Murfreesboro and in surrounding areas, lawyers spoke of his meticulous nature, traditional, direct, and unyielding. A Vietnam veteran who transitioned to a legal career, he regarded the courtroom as a space of great importance. His space. The bailiff called the room to order. Before proceeding, Judge Keller addressed the room, looking at the attendees as he said, "I'd like to address a matter of decorum." He looked directly at Alana. "You, ma'am, the one in blue. Please rise." Alana blinked, surprised, and slowly stood. Her heart thudded a little faster, but she kept her posture straight. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he said, his voice firm. "That's not permitted in my courtroom. Neutrality matters here." A fine of $50 was levied for disrupting court decorum. The room fell silent. Some individuals adjusted in their seats. Others averted their gaze, visibly uncomfortable. Alana did not respond immediately. She was familiar with being publicly singled out, questioned, and dismissed, yet she still felt surprised. A fine? For wearing a necklace? She glanced at the bailiff, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," she stated calmly, "is this a published policy? Could you please direct me to the statute or court rule that permits that penalty?" Keller showed no visible reaction. "This is my courtroom. I established the procedures." Alana nodded thoughtfully. "I comprehend that, sir. However, are those procedures documented anywhere?" He fixed his gaze on her for a brief moment. "You may pay the fine at the clerk's desk, or you may depart." She detected a quiet intake of breath from someone seated behind her. Alana remained still. She did not speak louder. She did not engage in debate. She merely inclined her head slightly and stated, "I am not leaving." A gentleman in the front row, an older man wearing a tan suit, lifted his eyebrow. His gaze moved from her to Judge Keller and back again. Judge Keller slowly straightened his robe. Then you will be held in contempt? The bailiff subtly changed his stance. The prosecutor set aside his file. A palpable change occurred. The atmosphere felt denser, not with theatrics, but with focused concentration. Alana released a single breath through her nose. I'm here to support my cousin, Deshaun Grissom. The charges are being formally presented today, and he requested my presence. I'm not intending to cause any disturbance, Your Honor. However, I contend that this fine is not only unjust, but potentially unlawful. Judge Keller moved forward a little. Did you question my jurisdiction? Her expression remained unchanged. I am requesting an explanation of the policy and its legal basis. He hesitated briefly. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but the pause was present. He did not anticipate that. Who are you? He inquired, his voice growing tense. My name is Alana Meriwether, she replied, and I'm a constitutional attorney licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee. The courtroom cracked open. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath. Someone whispered under their breath, damn. She continued, measured and composed. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2010. I've worked for the Southern Center for Human Rights, and I currently serve as senior counsel at a nonprofit based in Memphis. I am present as a family member, but I understand the law, and I am aware of my rights. Keller relaxed back in his chair. For the first time, he appeared uneasy, not angry, simply unsteady. She could have smiled. She refrained. The ensuing silence was palpable. The judge began to speak, but stopped, instead rearranging the papers on his desk. However, the judge was unaware of who he was addressing. Alana did not grow up with wealth. She was raised in Jackson, Mississippi, in a faded brick duplex off of Robinson Road. Denise, her mother, held overnight shifts at the Willow Creek nursing home, and her father left when she was 8. Resources were scarce, but a set of principles guided them. Speak with clarity. Avoid minimizing your worth. Assert yourself when injustice occurs, but maintain composure and a dignified demeanor. By the age of 16, Alana had studied the Constitution from beginning to end on 2 separate occasions. She sought to comprehend the disparate treatment experienced by individuals like herself in courtrooms, offices, stores, and even churches. Her motivation wasn't anger, but rather a genuine curiosity. There was also a deeper element at play, a quiet determination. People consistently underestimated her, not only due to her brown skin or her choice to wear her hair natural, but also in subtle ways, like overlooking her in meetings. She remembered the way older male attorneys would address her as young lady, within rooms filled with men experiencing thinning hair and fragile egos. She quickly understood that possessing brilliance was insufficient. There were times when it needed to be carried quietly, allowing them to believe they were more astute, until they unwittingly stepped into a carefully constructed plan. When Alana was accepted into Harvard Law, it felt less like a joyous occasion and more like a validation. She had previously informed her high school counselor that her aspiration was to become a civil rights attorney. A genuine laugh escaped her. Then, she cautioned that law school presented fierce competition and wasn't necessarily a viable option. Alana remained silent. She simply intensified her studies. While attending Harvard, she wasn't boisterous. She found no need to be. She consistently occupied the front row of each constitutional law class, rapidly taking notes and posing questions that caused professors to pause. People began to observe her, yet still regarded her as unusual. This perception never felt satisfactory to her. After graduating, she declined 2 offers from large firms seeking impactful work. She spent several years in Alabama, defending minors within the legal system. Then, she moved to Memphis to join a nonprofit dedicated to combating housing discrimination. While she didn't gain widespread recognition, her work secured people's release from jail and kept families in their homes, transforming lives. Throughout this, she consistently wore her small gold cross, a deeply personal symbol. The brooch had been her grandmother's, accompanied by a handwritten note. It read, "Wear this when you need to be reminded you're not alone." Her grandmother never removed it. Not once. not even in court. Therefore, when Judge Keller singled her out, calling her out as if she were a disruptive teenager in detention, it didn't unsettle her. It evoked memories of the instances she's experienced being looked at and not truly seen. They never anticipated her. They anticipated the boisterous one, the angry one. There was someone poised to lash out or leave abruptly. Instead, they experienced something else entirely, a demonstration of precision, control, and strength through composure. This wasn't unprecedented. In 2017, within a courtroom in Little Rock, she observed a public defender struggle during a bail hearing. The judge seemed disengaged. The defendant, a 19-year-old facing trespassing charges at an abandoned building, was on the verge of being assigned $1,500 bail, an amount he was unlikely to afford. Alana rose, introduced herself, and referenced 3 Arkansas statutes that the judge seemed to have missed. The judge conceded. Bail was waived. The defendant was released that same day. That demonstrated her character. Consequently, sitting in Rutherford County, facing a fine for a necklace of great personal significance, before a judge who believed he could compel her to be silent, Alana remained steadfast. She straightened her posture. When she introduced herself to the courtroom, her name, her qualifications, her purpose for being present, it wasn't intended for Judge Keller. It was directed toward everyone who perceived her as simply someone's relative. However, today wasn't a day when silence was an option. The courtroom remained quiet for an unusually long time. Judge Keller shuffled papers, seemingly stalling. But Alana remained still, her hands clasped before her, patiently waiting. Not contesting, merely waiting. From the far corner, the prosecutor subtly adjusted his posture, his fingers still. The bailiff's gaze moved between Keller and Alana. A change was palpable. The room's power dynamic had altered. It wasn't solely emanating from the bench. Keller spoke, clearing his throat. This court will proceed with the next case. He refrained from mentioning the fine again, at least for now. However, the absence of his usual reprimand was keenly observed. Deshawn's case was then called. He remained standing, still wearing the wrinkled button-down shirt from county lockup. He looked at Alana, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. She offered him a singular, composed glance, a look conveying, "Don't panic. I've got this." The public defender approached the table. However, before he could speak, Alana moved forward. "Your Honor," she stated distinctly, "with the court's permission, I would like to represent Mr. Grissom today. I've reviewed the charges and spoken with him. He desires me to stand in his defense." Judge Keller looked up. "You aren't listed as counsel. I presented my bar card. My Tennessee license is current. You can verify with the Board of Professional Responsibility I am listed as Alana Joy Merriweather." He paused a moment too long and then nodded once. "Proceed." Alana moved to stand beside Deshawn. Her cousin appeared to want to laugh and cry simultaneously. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder as she turned to address the court. Mr. Grissom was stopped due to a non-functioning tail light. The arrest report indicates he was asked to leave the vehicle and subjected to a search without consent. No warrant was present. The officer's statement made no mention of probable cause. Additionally, the encounter progressed to resisting arrest when he inquired about the reason for being handcuffed. He did not raise his voice, nor did he threaten anyone. She retrieved a document from her purse. "I've submitted a written motion to dismiss, supported by 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings. Each affirms that a warrantless search under these circumstances constitutes a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Additionally, the resisting arrest charge lacks supporting video evidence, despite officers wearing department-issued body cams." The room was still again. Alana frowned, leaned back, and accepted the motion from the clerk. He reviewed it. It was evident. With a rapid scan of the room and a slight twitch of his jaw, Alana remained silent. She stood motionless, allowing him to read, while ensuring her presence was undeniable. Behind her, people subtly adjusted their positions, not from disinterest, but from focused attention. This was no longer the woman they believed was in distress just moments prior. This was a different person altogether. Judge Keller looked up. "You wrote this motion yourself?" "I did." I prepared this draft last night following a review of the police report and a conversation regarding the arrest with Mr. Grissom, and I am not affiliated with a law firm. I'm employed by a civil rights nonprofit. Our organization focuses on due process violations, housing discrimination, and wrongful convictions. The judge tapped the motion lightly on the desk. Your client's record? No prior arrests. No violent offenses. He's a full-time electrician's apprentice, simply trying to get to work on time the day this occurred. Another long silence. Keller turned to the prosecutor. State's position? The prosecutor paused. We'd be willing to dismiss the resisting charge. Maintain the traffic infraction. Alana spoke again, her voice resolute. We'd agree to that only with the court confirmation that the search was unlawful. Mr. Grissom deserves that documented. It was a confident move. No apologies. No hesitation. Simply a direct, justifiable request supported by legal precedent. Keller observed her. The courtroom rarely witnessed such assertiveness. A woman, a black woman, effortlessly navigating legal procedures. She did so without displaying anger or arrogance, simply presenting clear and precise facts. He adjusted his glasses. The motion to dismiss was granted. The traffic infraction remains with a warning, and no fines will be assessed. Alana offered a subtle nod, devoid of a smile or celebratory gestures. She then turned to Deshawn. You're free to go. He paused momentarily, as if his body needed time to process the news. Subsequently, he left the defendant's table and embraced her firmly. A murmur rippled through the courtroom once more. It wasn't regarding the case itself, but about her. However, what Alana did next silenced everyone. Instead of returning to her place, she faced the bench, her voice remaining calm. Before I sit down, Your Honor, I would like to formally challenge the fine issued earlier this morning. Keller visibly recoiled, as if startled. Do you want to reopen that matter? He asked. Yes, sir, she replied. You stated that religious symbols were not permitted in your courtroom. However, unless this courtroom is functioning under martial law, the First Amendment remains applicable. Her tone was measured. She did not need to raise her voice. In County of Allegheny versus ACLU, the Supreme Court underscored the requirement for government institutions to maintain neutrality rather than hostility towards religion. Prohibiting a small cross pendant, particularly from an individual who is not testifying or speaking to the court at that moment, does not represent neutrality. The action appeared as targeted suppression, and the gallery had gone completely still. Alana advanced 1 foot. Additionally, there was no written policy displayed, no public signage indicating the ban, and no prior warning provided. I am found without citation, without precedent, and without any attempt to verify my intent or role in the proceedings. Keller adjusted in his seat. His face had lost some of its typical composure. One could observe something stirring behind his eyes, calculation, doubt, perhaps even shame. Are you suggesting the court violated your rights? He inquired. Alana remained motionless. I am not making accusations. I am presenting established facts. I request the fine be rescinded, and the court record should indicate that this incident transpired outside established protocol. The prosecutor glanced up momentarily, then resumed, looking down. The bailiff's hands were now clasped before him, his jaw tense, and his posture more formal. Keller hesitated before replying. He fixed his gaze on her for a prolonged, intense period. Then he announced, the fine is withdrawn. This wouldn't be documented. Alana offered a brief nod. Thank you, Your Honor. She pivoted and proceeded to her place with composure. Murmurs arose once more. However, this time, they weren't filled with uncertainty. Instead, they conveyed interest and deference. A woman seated behind her silently asked another, Who is she? Alana remained uninvolved. She simply took her seat, retrieved her notebook, and gently opened it to a fresh page. The judge, for the first time that morning, seemed to be truly contemplating. His movements became more deliberate. He examined the files with greater attention. The issue he's ignited by the fine for the necklace had escalated. It had become something more significant. The prosecutor spoke quietly to the bailiff, who acknowledged with a nod and jotted a note. The shift was noticeable. Court reconvened. Several more cases were heard. However, the usual flow was disrupted. The observers were no longer focused on the legal charges. Their gazes repeatedly returned to Alana Merriweather, the woman who had corrected a judge without raising her voice. 30 minutes elapsed. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Keller called for a brief recess. He rose and exited through the side door silently. Alana remained seated. The bailiff approached her slowly. "Mom," he said, softer than previously, "may I pose a question to you?" She turned her head slightly. "Of course. Did you anticipate that occurring? Regarding the fine? Concerning everything?" Alana emitted the slightest laugh through her nose. "No, I was unaware of that, but I wasn't willing to ignore it." The bailiff touched the back of his neck. "I've been here for 8 years," he said. "Never seen him back down like that." "He's not a bad man," she said softly. "But power without accountability is dangerous," he agreed. It wasn't a matter of obligation, but comprehension. Further down the hall, two court reporters spoke quietly. The younger one appeared visibly shaken. She was familiar with every case, reciting them easily. "Lawyer?" one asked. "Yes, from Harvard. Can you believe that?" She attended to support her cousin and unexpectedly challenged the judge. The courtroom observers expressed disbelief. However, Alana felt no sense of triumph. She found no pleasure in undermining someone. Her purpose wasn't to shame Keller. She simply sought justice. When it was lacking, she created it herself, carefully and deliberately. Yet, a subtle shift began to appear in Judge Keller's gaze. Upon his return to the courtroom, Judge Keller seemed altered. His posture lacked its previous rigidity. He appeared unchanged in stature, simply quieter. No longer seemed a man attempting to maintain authority, but rather someone attempting to grasp how he relinquished it without awareness. He took a seat, adjusted his glasses, and proceeded to the next case. Even his voice had diminished in tone. It was subtly altered, almost imperceptible to an ordinary observer, yet Alana recognized it. She had witnessed this previously. Men in positions of influence struggling with a reality they resisted acknowledging. That they had transgressed a boundary, and someone unanticipated had retaliated. As the courtroom emptied and people moved towards the exit, Keller remained seated on the bench, his gaze fixed forward. Alana collected her belongings and was nearing the door when she heard him call out, "Ms. Merriweather." She paused and turned, her face showing no emotion. He rose from his seat and descended the steps deliberately, as if considering each one. "I'd like a word, if you're willing." The bailiff seemed uneasy, questioning whether this was a directive or a private inquiry. Alana offered a subtle nod, then turned to Deshawn. "Give me 5," she murmured to him. Keller refrained from escorting her into chambers. They remained just outside the vacant courtroom, maintaining enough distance for some discretion, yet remaining visible. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Alana didn't reply. Not yet. She allowed him to formulate his thoughts. "I formed an assumption," he proceeded, "an inequitable one, regarding your intentions, regarding your position. I was mistaken," she responded gently, but without resentment. He lowered his gaze. "That's the difficulty, isn't it? One shouldn't need to be." Another pause. "I have dedicated 32 years to that bench," Keller stated, "and I have valued order, structure, neutrality. But you help me understand, occasionally what we consider neutral is simply convenient for those already in power." The statement impacted him more profoundly than anticipated. Alana simply looked at him, maintaining steady, respectful eye contact. There was no trace of ego, only honesty in her silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he stated, "but I will say this. I won't forget today." Alana offered a slight nod. "That's all I hoped for." She prepared to leave, but he called out to her one last time. "If you're ever back in Murfreesboro, I'd be honored to hear you argue again." That element genuinely surprised her. "I hope not to need to," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. They both understood the unspoken meaning behind her words. The sun had risen higher, and the heat was intense. Deshawn stood near the sidewalk, looking at his phone. He brightened when he saw her. "What is that?" he asked, astonished. Alana shrugged, retrieving her keys from her purse. Just a small civics lesson. Seriously, you confronted a judge. In his home. She gave him a look. Don't make it sound heroic. I didn't go there to fight. I want to hear what he had to say. When someone attempts to diminish your importance for reasons related to your identity, you face a choice. Remain silent or voice your perspective. Deshawn leaned against her car, nodding slowly. I swear, if I didn't know you better, I'd say you rehearsed that, I remarked. She laughed. I didn't, but maybe I should start writing it down. At that moment, a local reporter from the Murfreesboro News Journal approached, holding a voice recorder and a notebook. Ms. Merriweather? Alana turned. I observed what unfolded. Our readers would likely appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you consider an interview? She looked at Deshawn, then returned her gaze to the reporter. Let me consider that. The reporter offered her a card and stepped back. You prompted considerable thought today. Such occurrences are infrequent in court. As I walked toward the car, Deshawn remarked, they will discuss this, you know. Alana shrugged again. Let them, however, what transpired outside the courtroom held equal significance. As Alana and Deshawn arrived at his apartment complex on the west side of Murfreesboro, his phone was constantly buzzing. Calls, texts, and even direct messages flooded in. A cousin in Chattanooga had already learned the news. A friend from high school had sent a screenshot of a local news blog displaying the headline. Attorney silently dismantles courtroom bias. Judge withdraws fine, dismisses case. Deshawn looked at her, his eyes wide. It's already on the internet? Alana offered a small smile. I mentioned to you, people discuss events, particularly when expectations aren't met. She did not seek recognition. Not currently. Not in the past. However, there were occasions when being noticed wasn't a decision. It was a consequence of acting correctly when the option of remaining unnoticed wasn't available. Afterward that evening, she was at her kitchen table, drinking tea, the small cross necklace still on her collarbone. Her inbox contained numerous messages, some from familiar people, others from unknown individuals. Several legal blogs had already published summaries. A user on Twitter had shared a clip from the live stream, adding the caption, "This is how you correct injustice," without ever raising your voice. However, Alana wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was considering a statement from Judge Keller. What we often consider neutral is simply convenient for those already wielding the authority. That observation resonated with her. She recalled her childhood, holding her grandmother's hand during evening church service. The pastor's words resonated. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not shout. It's stand. Initially, it seemed like a poetic statement. Now it felt genuine. The following day, she returned to her position at the nonprofit office in Memphis. Her colleagues did not alter their behavior toward her. There were no celebratory balloons or enthusiastic applause. Instead, one of the interns presented her with a file and requested she review a housing complaint by noon. She appreciated the normalcy of it. Information still circulated, even without her direct involvement. A week later, she received a call from the Middle Tennessee State University Law Department. They were planning a community forum concerning courtroom ethics and bias, and a member of their board had recommended her as a speaker. She nearly declined. Nearly. Then she recalled the courtroom, the shift in people's gaze when they recognized her as an individual, and how many others remained voiceless, awaiting someone to advocate for them. Consequently, she consented to participate in the forum. 14 days later, a pastor from a church in Smyrna contacted her. He requested that she address their youth group regarding the law, its true meaning, its protective function, and how it can be applied equitably if individuals understand how to ensure its accountability. She accepted the invitation. She continued to agree, not due to enjoying the focus, but because the narrative was no longer solely hers. It belonged to all who had ever occupied the rear of a courtroom and considered, "They won't hear me." She had never shared this with Keller. However, that day had also altered her. She frequently reflected on him. She questioned whether he retained that moment within his memory as she did. If he ever observed someone in his courtroom differently afterward, perhaps with increased consideration, perhaps with a touch more humility. She hoped so. One Friday afternoon, as she was leaving the office, she noticed an envelope affixed to her door. It bore no name and no return address, only her name typed neatly. Inside was a brief note that read, Ms. Merriweather, I've revised the courtroom conduct guidelines. Religious attire or symbols, unless disruptive, will no longer be penalized. That was all. There was no apology. No signature appeared beyond the initials. Yet it was sufficient. She folded the note and placed it within her grandmother's Bible. Alana Merriweather didn't seek recognition. She desired equity. Certain narratives briefly capture attention before fading. Others resonate deeply, altering perspectives, even without direct interaction with the individual who initiated that change. For Alana Merriweather, that courtroom moment represented not a culmination, but a segment within a more extensive narrative. A narrative encompassing decisions largely unseen by others. For instance, staying up all night to assist a tenant contesting an unlawful eviction. Dealing with late-night calls from worried mothers whose sons were detained without bail. Or traveling 3 hours to a courthouse in Jackson simply to observe a judge who was reported to be unfairly treating defendants with limited financial resources. She made no introductions. She simply observed, documented her findings, and waited for discernible trends to emerge. When questioned about her composure and restraint in the face of disrespect, she consistently replied, I know what I carry. She didn't need to demonstrate its weight to show it was heavy. That courtroom didn't alter her. It simply reinforced why she selected this profession initially. Not for recognition, not for retribution, for respect. She had no desire to embarrass Judge Keller. She aimed to make him consider. And in that, she was successful. Some time passed, and during a talk with a group of teenage girls at a public charter school in Memphis, one of them asked, Weren't you the woman who spoke directly to the judge and caused him to appear mistaken? Alana responded with a smile. I didn't speak directly to him. I spoke with purpose. And I didn't cause him to appear mistaken. I offered him an opportunity to reconsider. The girls seemed surprised. Isn't that essentially the same thing? Alana replied, Not in the slightest. Several of the girls chuckled, but a few seemed to take her words to heart. Those were the ones she intended to reach. She continued, The goal isn't to win arguments. It's to win ground, so the next person doesn't have to fight the same fight. That resonated with them, just as it resonated with her. She understood her story might disappear from news feeds. The tweets, the blogs, the clipped videos, they'd all be lost eventually. But someone would remember. Someone in the gallery who witnessed that moment unfold. Someone who'd felt invisible that day and walked out feeling a little stronger. That was sufficient. Some individuals enter a space seeking attention. Others, like Alana, enter, communicate with precision, and leave a lasting impact. The gold cross remained a daily adornment. She would be prepared again if another courtroom attempted to challenge its presence. For invariably, someone will attempt to diminish you to align with their expectations. And equally, a decision will always present itself, to diminish or to stand, to speak or to allow silence to convey your message. She elected to stand, with insight, not with empty words, not with arrogance, but with a clear objective. And that's what caused people to recall, not that she achieved victory, but how she achieved it. If this narrative resonated with you even slightly, if it prompted thought, emotion, or introspection, then please don't keep it private. Subscribe, distribute it, and help spread it. You never know when your steady voice might be the one that transforms the atmosphere.